Hello, my dear viewers. I wish you pleasant viewing and a wonderful day. I also look forward to your feedback in the comments. Hello, my name is Monica, and this is my instructive and cruel story. They say you just know when it's time, and that morning, I did. After 12 years of giving everything to Varelli Group, early mornings, late nights, skipped birthdays, anniversaries, vacations I never took, I walked through the automatic doors with a cardboard box in my arms and a calm I hadn't felt in years. The box wasn't heavy, at least not physically. A framed photo of my daughter at her kindergarten graduation, a few notebooks, my favorite coffee mug with the cracked handle, and a folder tucked neatly underneath it all. But emotionally, that box carried the weight of every ignored idea, every time I stayed quiet while someone else took credit, every microaggression I swallowed because I wasn't a team player if I pushed back. I passed the front desk and nodded to Gary, who gave me a polite but confused smile. I didn't stop to explain. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt surreal, a silent, rising echo of a chapter closing. Klaus Richter's office was at the end of the hall, a corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows and the kind of desk you only earn by breaking promises. Klaus himself sat behind it, tapping away at his keyboard. The man had always reminded me of an aging wolf, sharp, predatory, confident in a way that turned threatening the second you challenged him. I knocked once. He looked up, mildly annoyed. "Monica, early for once. What's this?" I stepped in and placed the envelope on his desk. "My resignation." He blinked, then laughed. Not a chuckle, a full, throaty laugh, like I had just told him I was moving to Mars to open a yoga studio for cats. "You're resigning? Now?" he said, shaking his head as if I were a confused toddler. "Where are you going to go, Monica? You think there's a line out there for 50-year-old project managers with trust issues?" I stood straight. Not defensive, not cold, just sure. "I'll be fine." "Monica, come on, be serious. This place is what made you. I gave you a shot when no one else would." I said nothing. We both knew that wasn't true. "Is this about the promotion? Because if this is about Jerome getting the VP slot, you need to grow up." My voice was steady. "It's not about Jerome. It's about everything. This place changed. Or maybe I just stopped pretending it hadn't." Klaus waved a hand, dismissively. "So what's this then? Some dramatic exit? A midlife crisis in an envelope?" I smiled. "Just a little." "Open it." He frowned but complied, tearing the flap with the practiced impatience of a man used to controlling outcomes. He pulled out the paper and read. At first he looked bored, then confused, and then, very slowly, he paled. This is the company's IP agreement," he said. "What the hell is this doing in here?" "Read the highlighted section." He scanned, his eyes darting faster. Then he stopped. "All proprietary tools, software, data structures, and development frameworks created outside the scope of team-assigned projects remain the intellectual property of the originating employee, unless otherwise designated through contract or written assignment." He looked up. "You can't be serious." "I am. You developed those systems while employed here. That makes them company property." "No," I said. "I developed them on my own time, after hours, on my own equipment, and I documented everything. The systems we've been using for the last 2 years, the client optimization model, the automated report generator, even the project flowcharting tools, they were mine. I let the company use them, but I never signed them over." Klaus stood slowly, the blood draining from his face. "You expect me to believe that you've just been letting us use, what, beta versions? Call them trial versions, with revocation clauses." He walked around the desk. "You walked in here with a box. What's in it?" I lifted the box and set it on a nearby chair. "Everything that belongs to me." He narrowed his eyes. "Specifically?" "My daughter's photo, my mug, my notebooks, and a portable hard drive containing all my original documentation." "You can't take that." "Watch me." He was seething now. "If you think you can just walk out with our core tools, you're delusional. You want a lawsuit? because this is how you get one. I consulted with a lawyer. Everything in that envelope was reviewed. And you might want to double-check your own contract, Klaus. The policies haven't been updated since 2009. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned to leave. My steps were slow, deliberate. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice lower, desperate. "You won't find another company willing to touch you after this. You're too old, too stubborn, too—" I stopped at the door and turned back to him. "You said this place made me," I said. "But you were wrong. I made this place work. And when it starts to crumble without me, remember this moment." Then I walked out. And I didn't look back. Not even when I heard him pick up the phone and start dialing legal. Because the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. 6 years ago, I was offered the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. A full scholarship to MIT. Not just a generic offer. No, this was personal. A letter signed by the department head himself, referencing my work on predictive analytics and modular systems integration. "Your talent could reshape the landscape of data engineering," it read. "We would be honored to have you." When I read it, I was in my cramped kitchen, a coffee-stained hoodie hanging off one shoulder, my daughter asleep in the other room. I remember sitting down on the floor, the letter trembling in my hands. I didn't cry right away. I just stared at it, letting the words sink in. This was it. Proof that I was more than support staff, more than Klaus's go-to fixer. I was brilliant, capable, seen. I almost accepted that day. But then I made the mistake of telling Klaus. We were standing near the glass stairwell, just outside the second-floor conference room. I'd casually mentioned the letter, expecting, I don't know, a handshake? A pat on the back? Instead, Klaus laughed. Not mockingly, but condescendingly, like I'd just said something naive. "Monica," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. This is your MIT. You don't need more theory. You're already doing the real work." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. "You go there, you're just another face. Here, you're becoming a leader. I've got big plans for you. Stay the course." It wasn't the words themselves that convinced me. It was the way he said them, like he was letting me in on a secret, like I was special. So I said no to MIT. I told myself it was practical, that I was investing in my career, in my daughter's stability, that Klaus saw something in me no professor could. For the next 3 years, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. Nights blurred into mornings. My social life disappeared. I automated client onboarding systems. I overhauled internal workflow structures. I even built a rudimentary AI forecasting tool that cut response times by 32%, on my own time. But the real breakthrough came late one fall. I had been sketching out a new model for client retention, a system that adapted user experience based on behavioral data and engagement trends. It was sleek, efficient, and wildly ahead of anything the company was using. I coded the prototype over 6 sleepless weeks, subsisting on caffeine and determination. I named it Aegis Core. It could predict client drop-off weeks in advance and suggest automated interventions. I tested it quietly, then deployed a shadow version across 2 departments. The results were undeniable. Klaus called me into his office, eyebrows raised. "What the hell is Aegis Core?" I explained. Showed him the data. He whistled low. "Jesus, Monica, this could redefine our entire model." I smiled. Just a little. That was the idea. 2 weeks later, he asked me to prepare a comprehensive report for the quarterly leadership presentation. "Make it polished," he said. "Executives don't read code." So I did. I wrote a 40-page brief, visual mock-ups, scalability projections, even client testimonials. I included a cover sheet with my name, my work. The morning of the presentation, I wasn't invited to the main meeting. "Space is tight," his assistant explained. "Klaus will present on your behalf." I sat at my desk, telling myself it was fine, that the work would speak for itself. It did. but not for me. When the meeting recap was circulated, Aegis Corps was credited as a cross-departmental initiative led by executive strategy. Klaus sent a follow-up email. Nice work, Monica. Huge win for the team. No mention of my name. No attribution. No seat at the table. I confronted him. In his office, door closed, blinds drawn. You didn't credit me. He looked up from his phone, annoyed. You want a ribbon? Monica, this isn't college. You're not writing term papers. I wrote that model. Every line. And now it's company property. You work here. That's how this works. Next time, document your expectations ahead of time. I walked out without saying another word. But inside, something broke. That night, I stayed late. Not to work. To download. To back up. To prepare. Because that was the moment I knew, really knew, I wasn't being mentored. I was being used. And one day, when I left, I would take everything that was mine with me. It took a few days after I resigned before I could even look at my old files. At first, I told myself it was just about organizing, some post-employment tidying, clearing up space on my drives, making room for whatever came next. But somewhere in the silence of my apartment, no pings, no meetings, no Klaus, I realized I wasn't organizing. I was preparing. I was assembling a war chest. I opened the folder labeled Aegis Corps Dev, buried under layers of subdirectories. What greeted me was a digital timeline of years' worth of work. Time-stamped logs, progress reports, handwritten flowcharts scanned in haste, early APA call mockups, and hundreds of lines of annotated code. There were also audio files, those 3 a.m. voice memos I recorded half asleep, too tired to type, too afraid to forget. One began, Okay, update for 3:47 a.m. Rewriting the dependency engine so the behavior model isn't locked to client-tier assumptions. Should make the drop-off predictions more dynamic. If this works, it'll cut churn detection from 14 days to 4. I heard the exhaustion in my voice, but I also heard the spark. The part of me that still believed someone would see my effort, my brilliance. That one day, this work would be more than a ghost under someone else's name. Digging deeper, I found snapshots of data dashboards, integration schematics, and prototype test footage. They told a story Klaus had never intended anyone to read. One with only one author, me. And then, I found something unexpected. It was in a folder called Ref Material KR, a name I didn't recognize. Probably something I'd swept in during a rushed backup before wiping my office machine. The file was labeled Klaus Richter, Book Draft, v4.doc. My pulse jumped. I opened it. The title hit me like a punch. The Visionary Mind, How I Built the Future of Business Intelligence, by Klaus Richter. I felt my stomach knot as I read the dedication, To Those Who Dare to Lead. I skimmed through the chapters. The early sections were bland, stuffed with buzzwords, team leadership platitudes, and shallow insights dressed in confident italics. But then I hit Chapter 7, The Aegis Principle. I froze. With a sinking heart, I read line after line lifted directly from my presentations. My diagrams, my system logic, even my phrasing, the way I explained dynamic behavioral triggers using adaptive logic loops. It was all there. Except my name, I was never mentioned, not even in a footnote. Every innovation was credited to our department, or my vision. I read through the chapter twice. By the third time, I wasn't shocked anymore. I was burning. This wasn't just betrayal. This wasn't even theft. This was Klaus rewriting history, my work, my legacy. That's when the decision crystallized. It wasn't enough to walk away. I had to stop him from walking into his next TED Talk, hailed as a pioneer, when all he'd ever done was wear a suit and point at my slides. So I opened a new document and began to write. Not to Klaus, not to HR, not even to the press. To Cressida Takahashi, CEO of Halcyon Metrics, a woman who, unlike Klaus, actually did build her empire. I'd seen her speak once on a panel titled Ethics and Innovation. I remembered what she'd said. If your progress comes at the expense of someone else's silence, you're not a leader, you're a thief. I started typing. Ms. Takahashi, you don't know me yet, but you know my work. You've likely seen the results of my systems. What you haven't seen is the woman behind them. That's because she was buried beneath a man's ambition. I detailed my contributions, attached voice memos, logs, screenshots, my version histories. Then the manuscript, Chapter 7, with side-by-side comparisons. I made it irrefutable. At the end, I wrote, I'm not seeking sympathy. I'm offering something better. Value, clarity, innovation that was built with integrity. And I'm ready to build again. Somewhere it will count. I read the email 5 times before I clicked send. When I did, my fingers trembled. Not from fear, from release. For the first time in years, I wasn't trapped behind someone else's curtain. I was stepping out. It only took 3 days. 3 days after I hit send on that email to Halcyon Metrics, my inbox pinged with a reply. But it wasn't from an assistant or legal intermediary. It was directly from Lenora Klein, CTO of Halcyon, a woman whose reputation for innovation was matched only by her blunt integrity. The subject line was simple. We need to talk. She proposed a meeting, no boardroom, no Zoom link. A quiet cafe on the east side of Midtown. I arrived 10 minutes early, but she was already there, seated at a corner table. A tablet in front of her, black coffee half full. No entourage, no pretense. Just presence. Monica, she said, rising to shake my hand. You're not what I expected. I raised an eyebrow. And what were you expecting? She gave a half smile. Someone either completely shattered or sharpening a sword. You're composed. I was shattered, I said. Then I sharpened a sword. Now I'm just here. She gestured to the seat across from her. I went through everything. Your logs, sketches, even those 3 a.m. voice memos. I don't say this lightly. You've built something revolutionary. Not just the architecture, but the clarity of your process, the foresight in your structures. It's not just smart, it's resilient. I sipped the tea I'd ordered on autopilot. That system was my life. I built it because no one else could see the gap I saw. Klaus. He saw the value, but not the creator. That's why I'm here, Lenora said. I don't want to license what you built. I want you to rebuild it, on your terms. No interference, no corporate red tape, full creative control, your team, your timeline. And you retain authorship. Your name leads every slide, every white paper, every patent. We'll make your legacy untouchable. It took me a moment to process the offer. Not because it was too good to be true, but because it was exactly what I had stopped believing could exist. You're offering me a blank canvas, I said slowly. I'm offering you authorship, she corrected. Not just of your work, of your future. I nodded. Not because I needed more time to think, but because the emotion in my chest felt too big to speak through. I'll need a day, I said. You've earned 10, she replied, rising, but I hope you don't need them. It should have been a moment of triumph. But triumph doesn't arrive alone. It's always followed. That night, someone knocked on my door. A courier. Hand delivery, no signature required. Inside the envelope was a letterhead I recognized instantly. Richter and Gray, LLP. Klaus's attack dogs. Cease and desist. The accusations were predictable. Unauthorized use of proprietary systems, violation of non-disclosure clauses, theft of intellectual property. They referenced vague contract terms and cited obscure policy sections. But here's the thing about writing policies. You remember the ones you created. 3 years ago, frustrated by our company's vague and dangerous IP terms, I'd taken it upon myself to write an internal addendum. It clarified the boundaries of corporate ownership. It outlined employee rights. It protected creators. And Klaus had signed it himself. I opened my secure vault, found the file labeled Policy Addendum 4.3b final.pdf, and smiled. It was all there: metadata, email chains, internal approval logs. Ironclad. One line stood out: any innovation developed independently, using non-company equipment, and outside the scope of assigned projects, shall remain the intellectual property of the employee. I didn't just follow the rules, I wrote them. I composed a reply. It was short, cold, surgical. To whom it may concern, please refer to Policy Addendum 4.3b, authored by myself and approved by Klaus Richter on June 7, 2019, under Company Governance. As the attached metadata and correspondence confirm, the systems in question were developed independently, outside of contractual scope, and remain my exclusive intellectual property. All relevant documentation is available upon request. I copied Lenora. Her reply came minutes later. Let them come. We're not backing down. Your future is already underway. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just defending myself. I was reclaiming everything that had ever been mine. The company didn't waste time. Barely a month after my resignation, they launched the system. It was a show: slick branding, promotional videos with glowing graphics, and Klaus standing smugly in front of a massive curved LED screen at the annual Tech Expo. He called it the future of enterprise AI, his voice full of triumph, his arms wide as if inviting the world into a new era. They even kept the name, Aegis Core. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, laptop open, tea growing cold beside me. My name, of course, was nowhere to be found. They thought they could run it without me. They were wrong. In the first 48 hours post-launch, things appeared fine. The interface worked, reports generated, data streamed. But soon, beneath the glossy surface, the fractures began to appear. The optimization module, the beating heart of Aegis Core, wasn't just unstable. It was entirely absent. Whole subroutines collapsed mid-process. Predictive analysis returned bizarre results. Outliers flagged as trends, actual patterns dismissed as noise. Several corporate clients noticed latency issues. One international partner reported the system recommended halting operations due to a non-existent risk forecast. I imagined the meetings, the whiteboards scribbled over in panic, the IT tickets multiplying by the hour. Because the truth was this: I never handed over the final optimization module. Not out of spite, because it wasn't theirs to begin with. The core engine, the learning algorithm that allowed Aegis Core to refine its own strategies in real time, was encrypted, secure, and it was anchored to a proprietary function, an autonomous evaluation loop tied to one key identifier: MTH, Monica Thalia Hart. The initials weren't vanity. They were a cryptographic watermark buried deep in the source logic. Every update, every self-correcting routine was chained to that signature. Removing it broke the sequence. Replacing it triggered an authentication failure that rendered the module inert. I didn't do this to sabotage them. I did it because I knew what Klaus would try. I had learned the hard way that legacy means nothing if you don't protect it. By the end of the week, I started receiving messages. The first was from Maya, a junior software lead I once mentored. Hey Monica, any chance you'd be open to a quick consulting call? Totally unofficial, just curious about some integration hiccups we're seeing. Then Jacob from Infrastructure left a voicemail. Monica, I know things didn't end well, but something's wrong. We're seeing performance degradation that doesn't make sense. Predictive engines are practically hallucinating outcomes. If there's anything you could offer, even a pointer. I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness. Out of principle. Because silence, I'd learned, can be a powerful kind of justice. The internal struggle soon leaked outward. Clients started noticing discrepancies. A logistics firm in Chicago posted a scathing breakdown of Aegis Core's misdiagnosis of their shipment flow. Forums erupted with developers dissecting anomalies in public-facing APIs. On Reddit, someone posted side-by-side outputs from a pre-release demo, which I had quietly shared months ago under a pseudonym, and the current product. The differences were glaring. Klaus made no statements, but I could picture the storm. Legal panicking, marketing scrambling to spin the narrative, developers on overnight shifts trying to locate a fix they didn't understand. They'd tried everything. They restructured the core codebase, deployed hotfixes, tried brute forcing a patch over the optimization void. But it wasn't about inserting a line of code. The engine didn't exist as a file. It was a system of logic strung across linked libraries, invisible to the untrained eye. You couldn't replicate it unless you understood how I thought. The worst part for them? My initials weren't just digital graffiti, they were keys. Without the original framework and authentication design, every attempt to rewrite the engine was like rearranging letters in a language they didn't speak. I received more messages. From an integration partner, our backend flags several strings tied to a Monica heart. We were told you're no longer involved, but would you be open to consulting? Confidentially, of course. From a former project manager. Monica, please, it's chaos here. They won't admit it, but we need you. The module doesn't work without your seed architecture. It's not just broken, it's hollow. Still, I said nothing. In the quiet of my apartment, I watched it unfold. My laptop logged forum threads, news alerts, leaked memos from inside the company. The code, even broken, was doing its job, making it impossible for anyone but me to fix. Because when Klaus stood on that stage, preening and gloating, he didn't know he was launching a prototype, not the final system. I had never released the final version. I had never intended to, not to him. They had tried to build a future on stolen ground, but I had left them a map full of blank spaces, invisible walls, ghosts, and everywhere they turned, they found those 3 letters, MTH. They couldn't replace me. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because I had written the rules they now had to follow, and I never told them where they ended. The invitation arrived with a sharp chime on my phone, a name I hadn't seen in years. An encrypted message from one of the event organizers of the Global Innovation Conference, NYC. You're invited to attend and, should you choose, speak at this year's keynote sessions. Your contributions to enterprise systems engineering have not gone unnoticed. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the conference, the one Klaus had been chasing like a holy grail. For years, he'd bragged about how one day he'd walk onto that stage, bathed in spotlight, and present Aegis Core as the pinnacle of intelligent systems. And now, he was scheduled to unveil what he was calling the next evolution of our, no, my, system. Except Aegis Core was already fraying at the seams. It had been a month since the public launch, a month of cascading failures, incomplete functions, and a steadily growing whisper network among clients and engineers. The optimization module was broken, or rather, it was missing. I knew it. They knew it. Everyone else was beginning to suspect it. I didn't accept the invite to reclaim the spotlight. I didn't want an ovation or revenge. I just wanted to watch. The conference center downtown was a modern cathedral to technology. Glass walls, steel girders, every surface humming with innovation. Inside, the keynote hall was already packed. Rows upon rows of engineers, developers, executives, and students all waited for the main act. Klaus, their supposed visionary. I took a seat in the middle, blending in. Dark blazer, red lipstick, hair pinned up. Just another tech enthusiast. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. Then came Klaus. He stepped onto the stage with the confidence of a man used to applause. His tailored suit, neatly styled hair, and bright smile were all part of his performance. Good morning, innovators, he began, spreading his arms. Today, I present Aegis Core 2.0. Smarter, faster, more adaptive than ever before. This isn't just a tool, it's the future of enterprise autonomy. The first few slides rolled by. Animated charts, client logos, buzzwords. The audience clapped, but not loudly. I recognized every image, every phrase. They were mine. The architecture he described was mine. The language, my language. But even dressed in gloss, I could feel the gaps. It was hollow. The system was an empty shell of what I'd built. The optimization core, the real soul of the model, was gone. And you could tell. Then came the Q&A. A woman in the front row raised her hand. Can you walk us through the recursive anomaly correction process your system uses? Specifically how it scales in adaptive environments? Klaus's expression froze for half a second. Anomaly correction is handled dynamically within our core logic, he said smoothly. We've built a layered protocol that detects and responds to patterns as they shift. Which protocol? She asked, eyebrows raised. You mentioned a federated logic approach, but there's no reference to that in the architecture overview. Another hand. A man in a plaid shirt. You talked about self-adaptive clustering. Is that handled through your hybrid loop model, or have you implemented a separate anomaly routing engine? Klaus blinked. We're still iterating on certain features for dynamic deployment. So you haven't deployed them yet? Another voice asked. The shift in the room was instant. A hum of murmurs. Screens lit up. I saw people opening laptops. A few whispered to their neighbors. Someone behind me muttered, "He doesn't know how it works." Then a voice from the back. Calm. Firm. Why are the optimization hooks in your system still tagged with MTH? I held my breath. Klaus swallowed. That's legacy code from early builds. We're working on phasing that out. Isn't MTH Monica Hart? Someone asked loudly. The room rippled with the name. Klaus's voice cracked. Look, these details are outside the current presentation scope. We'll be releasing more technical white papers soon. But it was too late. They had tasted blood. Why don't the adaptive modules respond to variable simulation testing? Are you aware that your predictive models have failed for 3 major clients in the last 2 weeks? Why is Monica Hart's signature still embedded in the main engine? His swagger collapsed in real time. The sweat on his brow caught the stage lights. His hands fumbled at the clicker. Then came the final blow. A familiar voice. Mark, my old colleague. From the back row, he stood slowly. If Monica Hart designed the engine, and it no longer functions without her, why are you still presenting yourself as its architect? Silence. Not awkward silence. Dead silence. The kind that carries judgment. Klaus tried to smile. It didn't reach his eyes. Let's take a short break, he said hoarsely. No one clapped. He walked off stage with his shoulders hunched, the bright lights behind him, the whispering crowd in front of him, his reputation disintegrating with every step. I stood quietly. No one recognized me as I made my way toward the exit. Outside, the city was the same as always, indifferent and buzzing. I walked down the block, the heels of my boots clicking steadily against the pavement. I pulled out my phone. A message from Lenora waited. You watching? I smiled. Front row. Justice doesn't always come in courtrooms. Sometimes, it comes in the form of questions you can't answer, silence that fills 1,000 seats, and the weight of stolen credit finally collapsing under its own fraud. The fallout from the conference was swift. By the time I got home that evening, my inbox was flooded. Journalists, industry insiders, former coworkers, even strangers from tech forums and Twitter threads. Everyone had questions. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Was it true? Was I the mind behind Aegis Core? And had Klaus really stolen it all? The tech blogs erupted with speculation. A thread titled, "The Real Genius Behind Aegis Core," reached the top of Hacker News within hours. One user had even compiled a timeline using old code snippets, archived commits, and internal memos that had leaked online. Somehow, they traced half a dozen key changes in the Aegis Core beta system to logs bearing my initials. MTH. The company, still dizzy from the embarrassment of the conference, tried to wrest back control of the narrative. Within a week, their legal team fired the first official salvo. A thick envelope delivered by courier. Inside, a formal complaint. They were preparing to sue me. The charges? Misappropriation of trade secrets, breach of non-compete clauses, intellectual property theft. I laughed when I read the last one. They were accusing me of stealing from myself. Lenora wasn't surprised. "This is their last move," she told me in a call. "They know the code's dead without you. Now they're just trying to bury you in paper." But we were ready. Halcyon's legal team moved fast. Within 48 hours, I was in meetings with patent attorneys, technical analysts, digital archivists, and expert witnesses. Every document I'd ever saved, every time-stamped file, each iteration log, and every prototype I had once coded alone in my living room was pulled into a secure cloud vault. But the most powerful piece of evidence didn't come from a server or a PDF. It came from an old, battered spiral-bound notebook. It was buried in a box in my closet, beneath photo albums and a broken router. I hadn't opened it in years. The cover was faded, the wire coil warped, pages frayed at the corners. I flipped through it, careful not to tear anything. On the 5th page, drawn in black ink and annotated with shorthand only I could understand, was a rough sketch of the Aegis Core optimization loop. Not a version copied from a whiteboard or recompiled from memory. This was the original. The moment of genesis. The purest form of my idea. And in the bottom right corner, as if it had been waiting all these years, was my signature. And a date. 3 years before Klaus ever gave his first presentation. Before the internal teams even heard the term Aegis Core. Before he ever uttered the words, "our innovation." We had the notebook examined by a digital forensics expert. They verified the age of the ink, the paper, the brand of pen even. They ran fiber analysis, cross-referenced the date with my cloud activity logs, where I'd saved a version of the design around the same week. Everything matched. When the experts submitted their findings, they included one sentence that made Lenora grin. "This sketch represents the earliest known origin of the Aegis Core optimization framework, and it is attributable solely to Monica Thalia Hart." It was the nail in Klaus's legal coffin, but I didn't want to just win in court. I wanted to restore the truth, to make it undeniable, to lift my authorship from whispers and leaked threads into official record. So I did the thing I had been too afraid to do for years. I filed a patent application. It wasn't simple. It took nearly 2 weeks of round-the-clock coordination. I worked with patent attorneys to ensure every feature, every modular innovation, and every dependency algorithm was accurately described. We compiled statements from my former collaborators, technical breakdowns, correspondence showing my early work, and even email threads with Klaus, where he referred to the optimization module as Monica's magic loop. The application was thick enough to be a novella. But when I hit submit, I felt something shift. I was no longer protecting what was mine. I was claiming it. The application became public within 24 hours. Tech outlets picked it up. One article read, "Aegis Core, the real creator steps into the light." Even Wired ran a piece with side-by-side comparisons between the notebook sketch and the final system model. Industry leaders began to weigh in. One CTO from a rival firm commented, "This kind of theft is all too common, but it's rare that someone has the receipts and the courage to fight back." I wasn't interested in the headlines. I didn't need applause. But the moment I signed the final page of that submission, something in me finally exhaled. For so long, I'd lived under the weight of compromise. I had let someone else take credit for my labor, my mind, my sacrifices. Now, the truth was no longer buried in servers or corporate archives. It was stamped, certified, and filed. It was inked into history. It started like a slow burn. At first, it was just a few industry blogs picking up the story of my patent filing. Quiet murmurs in niche forums, LinkedIn shares with vague captions like, "This is worth reading." But by midweek, the narrative broke wide open. One tech journalist published an exposé, weaving together my patent claim with years of suppressed recognition and questionable practices at Klaus's company. Then came Tech Radar, Fast Company, and finally CNN. Within days, headlines exploded across every major outlet. Company accused of intellectual theft, Aegis Core scandal grows. Hero engineer reclaims stolen legacy. Insiders confirm Klaus Richter took credit for groundbreaking innovation. I didn't speak publicly. I didn't have to. The evidence was speaking for me now, but the story no longer belonged just to me. Something had shifted, something collective, like a dam cracking under years of pressure. Suddenly, former employees started coming forward: engineers, analysts, interns, junior developers. Names I hadn't seen in half a decade emerged into the spotlight, not for glory, but for truth. One by one, they began to tell their stories. Some had been pushed out of projects after presenting ideas that were later rebranded under Klaus's name. Others recalled moments when code they had authored was mysteriously removed from changelogs, replaced with vague team contributions. A few had documentation: old emails, archived project plans, even Slack screenshots. There were whispers of cover-ups, manipulated Git histories, deleted version trails. The audit trails they had hoped were lost to time were resurfacing, and they had my initials all over them. I received one such email late on a Thursday night, from Sarah R., a systems integrator who left the company 4 years ago. Attached was a scanned document, an early project roadmap, one of the first outlines for what would become Aegis Core. I remembered it. I had written most of it during those long nights when everyone else went home. And there it was, under System Architecture Design, Monica Thalia Hart. Beneath it, in unmistakable pen, reformat for presentation. Move team names to general contributors. Klaus Richter. Sarah's note was simple. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I was scared. We all were. But now they weren't scared. Now they were furious. Within days, an anonymous whistleblower submitted a dossier to the Sentinel, a respected investigative tech publication. The dossier was damning: time-stamped server logs, internal emails, private Slack messages, voice notes transcribed from internal meetings. Hundreds of pages chronicling a consistent, deliberate erasure of credit. In one audio file, Klaus was recorded saying, "Just put my name first. No one outside the company cares who really coded it." Another Slack message showed him dismissing a junior developer's concern with a shrug. "If she's not going to fight for it, then it's mine." The leak hit like a meteor. Investors began pulling out within 48 hours. Aegis Core stock plunged 37% in a single day. The company's largest client, a Fortune 100 logistics firm, announced it was freezing all contracts until the internal investigation concluded. One major sponsor publicly severed ties, citing ethical concerns and issuing a statement of solidarity with me. Inside the company, chaos reigned. People I hadn't spoken to in years began messaging me. "He's locked in his office. They've brought in outside consultants to audit everything. There's talk of removing the entire executive board." Someone forwarded me a photo from inside HQ. Klaus walking out of a meeting room alone, papers clutched in both hands, face pale, his suit wrinkled, his laces untied. No more PR team, no more followers, no more stage. He was a king without a kingdom. Even the board began to crack. One member anonymously told Wired, "We were misled. We relied on his credibility. We had no idea the foundation was built on borrowed ideas." Except it wasn't borrowed. It was stolen. People finally began to see what had always been true. Klaus hadn't built anything. He had built a throne atop a mountain of other people's work. And now the mountain was crumbling. Colleagues who had stayed silent started offering testimonials. A few banded together to form a coalition, pledging to revise credit protocols across the industry. One of them, a former HR manager, began compiling a list of every employee whose work had been co-opted. My name topped that list. Journalists dug deeper. They found that Klaus had applied for multiple awards over the years, using altered project summaries, none of which listed me, or anyone else, as contributors. Every stolen slide, every forged citation, became part of the record. Even professional organizations who once praised him issued apologies. It wasn't just his career collapsing. It was the myth he had crafted. The image of Klaus Richter, visionary, innovator, futurist, shattered like glass. And in the wreckage, the world saw us. The quiet ones, the builders, the engineers whose names were always the smallest on the slide, or missing entirely. But no longer. I wasn't a footnote, I wasn't a background name. For the first time in 12 years, I felt something I couldn't name at first. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even triumph. It was relief. Relief that I wasn't the ghost in someone else's story anymore. Relief that truth, when given time and space, rises. And finally, I could breathe. Because I wasn't just reclaiming a name. I was reclaiming a future. The morning of the conference arrived with an unusual quiet. The city buzzed just beyond the windows, oblivious to the significance of the day. I made myself coffee and stared at the steam rising from the cup, the heat against my hands grounding me. I wasn't nervous, not anymore. This wasn't just about one presentation. This was the end of a long silence, the closing of one chapter, and the bold beginning of another. I'd been preparing for this moment, not with rehearsals or notes, but with the slow, deliberate return to my own identity. I didn't need a script. I had lived every line of the story I was about to tell. Every algorithm I had optimized, every line of code I had debugged at 3 a.m., every idea that had been credited to someone else while I watched from the sidelines. My phone rang at 8:17 a.m. I almost didn't answer, but the number was familiar. Too familiar. Klaus. I stared at the screen for a moment before picking up. "Monica?" His voice was frayed, almost hoarse. "Please. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I need your help." Silence. "I'm speaking at the morning panel. They expect me to talk about the core algorithm, the optimization module. I don't know how it works, not fully. I was going to improvise, but now there are rumors that you'll be there." I didn't say anything. He took a shaky breath. "They're going to ask questions, deep ones. If I mess this up again, it's over. My team's already gone. The board's watching. If you could just give me a summary, something. I'll say it was your work. I'll admit it all. Just help me understand it, please." I let the silence stretch. Then I said the words I had waited years to say. "No." Not angrily, not spitefully, just firmly. "You never asked me when it mattered. You only took. This is not your moment to repair. It's mine." He went quiet. Then a soft click. He had hung up. I turned off my phone and got dressed. I wore black. Clean, simple. Not to mourn what was lost, but to mark the closing of that chapter. The drive to the conference was quiet, the hum of the cab fading into the buzz of the city. I watched the skyline glide past, thinking of all the years I had stayed quiet, loyal, obedient, and how I was never going to do that again. The conference center was already humming when I arrived. The air was charged with expectation. People moved through the hallways in clusters, heads bent toward screens, voices low. They were speculating. I knew it. Some had seen the leaked documents, others had read the exposés. But what they hadn't seen, what no one had seen, was me. I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here to be known. The auditorium filled quickly. The panel Klaus had appeared on earlier had ended in awkward silence and evasive half-answers. According to whispers I overheard, his speech had collapsed midway. Someone asked about the optimization model. He had mumbled, dodged. One person told me he left the stage red-faced and visibly shaken. And now it was my turn. When my name was announced, a hush fell over the room. I stepped onto the stage, the lights casting long shadows, the hum of electronics buzzing softly around me. For a second, I stood quietly, letting the silence settle. I could see rows of faces watching me, some curious, others expectant, and a few, former colleagues, wide-eyed with something that looked like recognition and maybe regret. Then I spoke. "Good afternoon," I began, voice steady. "My name is Monica Thalia Hart, and 12 years ago, I began building something that would eventually be known as Aegis Core." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I worked on it during late nights, long weekends, in moments stolen between meetings and deadlines. It was mine, not just because I built the code, but because I built the thinking behind the code. I didn't just write functions, I wrote the logic that taught those functions to evolve. The crowd leaned forward. For years, my name wasn't on the slides. It wasn't in the awards or the press releases, but it was always there, in the systems that functioned, in the algorithms that learned, in the initials embedded deep in the architecture. I clicked to the first slide, a diagram of the original optimization loop, my handwritten notes still visible in the margins. The room was utterly still. I've spent most of my career watching someone else walk on stages like this, using words he didn't understand to describe work he didn't do. I was the silent partner in my own achievements. But today, I stand here as myself, no longer behind, no longer invisible. I paused, letting my words breathe. I claim this as my system. But more than that, I claim it as my story. A story of resilience, of silence, of finally saying enough. And to everyone who's ever watched someone else take credit for what you've built, I see you. And it's not too late to step into the light. The applause began slowly, then grew. Not polite, thunderous. They stood. Every person in that room stood. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, erased. Tears pricked my eyes. I looked up at the screen one last time, and for the first time in a decade, I saw my name projected not as an annotation, not as a footnote, but as a title. Monica Thalia, heart founder of Aegis Core Optimization System. It was more than recognition, it was justice, and it was just the beginning. A week after the conference, a letter arrived. A real one, ink on paper, not an email or a text message. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. Klaus. I opened it slowly, not because I expected anything new, but because part of me was curious what version of himself he would offer this time. Inside, a single page. His writing was careful, almost timid. Monica, there aren't enough words for what I did. For what I took. I told myself I was protecting the company, that my name would help open doors for us both. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of being outshined by someone more brilliant than I could ever pretend to be. I didn't deserve what I had. And I know now that I never truly earned it. What you built was nothing short of genius. I see that now. I hope the world does too. I'm sorry. Klaus. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Then I filed it away, not as a token of closure, but as a relic, like a fossil from a world I no longer inhabited. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his approval. I had moved beyond him, beyond that company, beyond the shadow of stolen praise. Because I was building something new. It started quietly, in a modest space above an old print shop downtown. Just me, a whiteboard, and a blank terminal. The room smelled faintly of paper and solder. There were no glass walls, no polished wood tables, no cold conference rooms filled with doubt and dismissal. Just freedom, the kind I had only imagined before. I called it Hollis AI-1. The name came from my grandmother, Hollis, who taught me to solve puzzles before I could tie my shoes. She believed in questions that didn't have easy answers. She believed in messy notebooks, in drawing outside the lines, in discovering truth through tenacity. So that's what this system would do. It would ask questions. It would learn from ambiguity, thrive in uncertainty, and make connections no algorithm had dared attempt before. Hollis AI-1 wasn't just about better computing. It was about building an intelligence that valued curiosity over control. One that didn't replicate bias or amplify exploitation. A system that could look at chaos and find meaning, not by brute force, but through nuance. The first module I wrote was a simple one, a recursive loop designed to identify internal conflict patterns in decision-making AI. But it was elegant, clean, intuitive. It didn't just run. It listened, responded, evolved. I signed it in the metadata, MTH. And this time, those initials didn't hide. They led. By the end of the month, I had a small team, Former colleagues who had quietly supported me, brilliant new engineers, researchers fresh out of university, people who had read my story and reached out with fire in their eyes. They didn't want to work for another monolith. They wanted to build something human. We weren't just writing code, we were rewriting expectations. We created a culture of transparency and accountability. Everyone's contributions were tracked, credited, celebrated. We debated ideas openly, invited challenge, rewarded originality. There were no closed doors, no stolen ideas. Every Friday, we held demo sessions, not to impress investors, but to honor each other. And the investors did come, one by one, intrigued by our clarity, our ethics, our momentum. But they came on our terms. No majority control. No oversight boards packed with suits. I had learned that lesson too well. Publications followed, Wired, MIT Tech Review, even the New York Times. They didn't just want to write about Hollis AI1, they wanted to write about me, about the woman who walked away and then built something better. But none of that felt like the pinnacle. Not the funding rounds, not the speaking invitations, not the profile pieces. The pinnacle was that first morning when I arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, and found a teammate already inside, laughing quietly as they debugged a test suite we'd stayed up building together. It was the quiet confidence in our team chat when someone pushed a brilliant update. It was seeing my initials in the changelog, no longer buried, no longer hidden. Because now I understood something fundamental. Success isn't just about being seen, it's about being seen as yourself. And I was done hiding. So I walked into my office that morning, booted up the system, and ran the first full simulation of Hollis AI1. The results scrolled across the screen, faster, smarter, cleaner than even Aegis Core had ever been. It adapted to a challenge we hadn't even trained it on. It spotted a pattern we hadn't seen. It asked a question I didn't expect. I smiled. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the future. And this time, my name was on the front page. Monica Thalia Hartfounder of Hollis AI1. The journey that had started in silence had found its voice. And it was mine. The news cycle had moved on. But I hadn't. Not in the obsessive sense, more in the quiet, observant way you watch a distant storm after it's passed, just to make sure it doesn't circle back. I still tracked Klaus's company in the background, watching its slow, clumsy unraveling. The glossy PR mask had worn thin, and the rot beneath it became harder to conceal with each passing week. They had replaced him as CEO in a half-hearted restructuring, but the damage had seeped into the walls. Confidence was gone. Clients were cautious. Talent was leaving. Projects stalled. The tech community, once eager to collaborate, now watched from a distance, wary of aligning with a brand so deeply associated with deception. Occasionally, I'd spot an article, some thin press release about a new initiative, a vague AI framework. The kind of language that said a lot while meaning nothing. They were trying to rebuild, but it was like patching a sinking ship with gauze. Nothing they produced could match what we were doing at Hollis. Nothing even came close. And then, the messages started. At first, it was just one or two. Former colleagues, people who had been complicit in their silence, or maybe just too afraid to speak. People who had once averted their eyes in the hallway or brushed past me in meetings. "Hey Monica," one message read. "I've been following Hollis. It's incredible. What you're doing. I was wondering, do you have any roles open? Things are rough over here." Another said, "I regret not standing up sooner. You deserved better. If you're hiring, I'd love a chance to make it right." They trickled in like cautious footsteps, returning to a house they once fled. And then the trickle became a stream. Data scientists, UX designers, infrastructure engineers, even two middle managers who had once rolled their eyes in meetings now reached out with restructured resumes and unusually humble cover letters. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't keeping a list of names to punish. But I didn't forget either. I had to weigh each inquiry, not just against their resumes, but against their silence. Some had good reasons. Others just had excuses. but I understood the environment they had come from. The fear, the compliance, the way mediocrity rewards loyalty and punishes brilliance. Still, I knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to have potential ignored because someone else was louder, bolder, more connected. So I answered them. I listened. I gave some of them a chance. Not because they had earned it, but because I had. Because Hollis wasn't just about brilliance. It was about integrity. It was about creating a place where being smart didn't mean being silenced, where innovation didn't have to hide. And we were growing. Hollis AI 1 had surpassed every projection we had set. Our second product line, Solari, was already in beta. It handled complex, context-sensitive tasks for urban planning models, and the feedback was exhilarating. We were partnering with universities, NGOs, even a few forward-thinking government agencies. The world was waking up, not just to what we had built, but to how we built it. Meanwhile, Klaus faded. I heard he'd taken a consulting gig through a back-channel firm. No public listings, no bios. The kind of work you take when you need a paycheck but can't afford a spotlight. Not at a major firm. Not speaking at conferences. Just quiet, behind the scenes. Maybe it was humility. Maybe it was exile. Maybe it was both. I didn't spend too much time wondering, because I was too busy building. Hollis wasn't just my redemption story. It was a movement. One built on integrity, invention, and unflinching honesty. And the people joining us now, they weren't just engineers. They were believers. They weren't here to climb over each other. They were here to build something bigger than themselves. I sat down one evening, alone in the office, lights dimmed, and reread the list of applicants from my old company. So many names, some familiar, some faded. Some I remembered from shared coffee breaks. Others I only recalled because they had once, however briefly, stood by me. In the end, I hired a few, and I watched them grow. I watched them light up with the same fire that once burned quietly in me. I saw them breathe easier, speak louder, think deeper, and maybe, in that, there was something like justice, because I knew something they were just starting to learn. Reinvention isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing a better future. And building it, line by line, truth by truth, name by name. It's a strange thing to look around and realize you've built the place you once dreamed about in fragments, between deadlines, disappointments, and dimmed expectations. But that's what Hollis had become. Not just a company, a community, a culture, a sanctuary for creativity and integrity. The office buzzed with energy every morning. Not the frantic, anxious kind I used to know, where people feared missed emails and hushed reprimands, but the kind born of anticipation and purpose. People arrived early, often before sunrise, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Conversations sparked over morning coffee. Spontaneous whiteboard sessions sprung from passing hallway remarks. It wasn't unusual to hear laughter ringing through the open-concept workspace, or see someone dancing in their chair when a tricky bug finally yielded to a clever fix. Ideas bloomed without being crushed by ego. Feedback flowed freely, layered with respect. Our walls weren't just whiteboards anymore. They were alive, mapped with sketches, flowcharts, user stories, and sometimes hopeful notes scribbled in dry erase marker. Thought of this last night while brushing my teeth. Can we make the model more empathetic in response to uncertainty? Best bug ever. I think it taught itself sarcasm. It was vibrant. It was fun. It was free. And somehow, in all the chaos of creation, we had become a team. A real one. Not bound by contracts or desperate career climbing, but by shared purpose, by trust, by the collective thrill of building something meaningful together. Elena, our systems lead, brewed the strongest coffee and left handwritten quotes on everyone's desk once a week. Growth is never by mere chance. It is the result of forces working together. Read the note she gave me last Friday. She had a way of seeing what each person needed and giving it to them in just a few words. Omar, a former data architect from my old company, now led the bias mitigation initiative in our language model division. He wore wild patterned shirts and played lo-fi jazz during late-night coding marathons. "This," he said once during a team demo, eyes bright, "this is the first place I've worked where my voice echoes instead of disappearing." Then there was Renee, our UX designer, who had applied with a portfolio that looked more like a love letter to human-machine harmony. Her ideas reshaped how Hollis AI1 interacted with real-world data. She once redesigned an interface 3 times in a week because, in her words, it didn't feel like kindness yet. We celebrated birthdays with themed days: Pajama Day, Superhero Day, once even a medieval cosplay day that turned into a full mock quest across the building. At first it felt silly. Now it was tradition. Meetings weren't performative here. They were collaborative. We built things together. We tore down our own assumptions. We laughed. A lot. And when something didn't work, we didn't assign blame. We got curious. Someone coined that phrase in a retrospective, and it stuck. When in doubt, get curious. Every month, we held a full team retrospective. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to grow. We looked at what worked, what didn't, what scared us, and what surprised us. We celebrated wins, mourned setbacks, and reminded ourselves why we started. Those sessions often ended with tears, not of frustration, but of gratitude. And through it all, Hollis thrived. Our systems were being adopted in ethical data centers, smart health platforms, next-gen logistics, and even experimental education programs. Not because we had the flashiest pitch, but because people trusted us. They trusted what we built and who we were. We made AI systems that made a difference, that helped people. We had grown to 50 employees, then 75, then 100. We leased 2 more floors, opened a satellite office in Berlin, and were in talks to expand into Singapore. And somehow, it still felt like a family. There was a warmth here, a rhythm, an unspoken understanding that we were doing something rare. And for me, a quiet, persistent joy. I didn't watch the industry for validation anymore. I didn't check for Klaus's name in headlines. I didn't brace for someone else to speak over me. I had no interest in comparisons. My time, my mind, and my heart were fully in this place. Because this time, the voice shaping the future was mine. And it echoed with the voices of a team that believed in each other. A team that had become more than coworkers. They had become my people.